Yeah, well, Paola Antonelli, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Martin Janssens. I am a Master's of Architecture student here in my last year at the UTSOA. And this is part of the Goldsmith interview series, which is sponsored by Dean Michelle Addington. Just gives me a second as a student of the university to ask our visiting lecturers a couple questions. Um,
Nice to meet you, Martin, and thank you for having me. As they
yeah,
say, like proper TV shows. Thank you for
nice.
having me.
Right, podcast, TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're in that realm, right? And thank you for stopping by the UTSOA. I think we've had a variety of lectures this year, and as a School of Architecture, it's very interesting to see the tangents of architecture growing to things like museum curation, in your role, or even, something like urban design. It's a little bit closer, but even on my end, it is amazing to see the broad scope that architecture can sort of relate to. Um, I think some of your more recent lectures and maybe your lecture today, you're going to talk about how there's always going to be a design crisis. And obviously, we're in the midst of a huge crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic. And I guess my first question relates to how your work as a curator has been changed by that crisis. Are you seeing the agency of designers in like a different light, or has it been sort of very monumental in how you're going to stage curations in the future?
Like everyone else, like you, also, my life has been turned upside down by the pandemic and also by all the other crises. There are so many crises happening at the same time. But on the other hand, it forced me to do something that I've done also in the past, which is to find new avenues to do my job. I mean, it's happened also in the past because in my position or in any creative position, creative with clients, you get rejections, you get, refusals. So I got a lot of no's to proposals of exhibitions, and in some cases I just shelved them. In other cases, I found other avenues. And actually, I will discuss it with you today in the lecture. So, in the past already, I had to drop the idea of curating in a gallery and go elsewhere. During the pandemic, it's become dramatic, right? So, I had to change completely paradigm. And it's been fascinating because the design emergency program that I started with Alice Rosthorn was completely inspired by what other people were doing during the pandemic. And in particular, it's Fat Joe that was having every night this IG Live. And I told Alice, well, if Fat Joe does it, why can't we? And so, so we started doing this IG Live series that is still ongoing. Tomorrow there's another one. But back to your question, has design gotten more agency and more power, or at least more presence during the pandemic? Yes. The big problem with design and architecture used to be clear to the public. It's buildings. But today, you know very well that it's not only buildings, right? Design was always vague, or at least people thought they knew what design was, chairs, cars. But in truth, there's so much else that they didn't think about. The pandemic gave Alice and I a chance to show many different types of design, like myriad different types of design that before were not so apparent. And it's not only our small IG Live, it's people that every day were discussing the design of masks, for instance,
Mhm.
N95 versus surgical masks, and getting granular into what it means to make a mask, the kind of loops that go around the head or around the ears. So this granularity that was forced by the fact that we were all having to deal with new objects, new interfaces, just a new life, I think brought design front and center for many, many different people in ways that they were not aware of before. I mean, they were dealing with design before, but they didn't know it was design, and now they know better. So it's great because that's my ambition, to give design awareness to as many people as possible.
Yeah. Um, I guess somewhat related to what you mentioned about the sort of it you used to know what architecture was, right? Like, or I guess there was a general understanding of what architecture was. As a curator, do you find that you're looking for just good design? Like, is there an underlying sort of just good design thing, or are you really focused on these different avenues, like looking into architecture, looking into furniture design, looking into to et cetera, or do you just kind of approach it in a general sense?
In a very comprehensive sense. Because I was trained as an architect, but in Milan at a time where architecture and design were the same thing. So within the architecture school, I was taking courses of architecture, which at that time was buildings, then there was urban planning, and there was design, both graphic and product. So it was really just a difference in scale, but the umbrella of design encompassed everything. Now, you tell me, you mentioned good design, and it's funny because even in that case, we knew what it was once upon a time, but now it's so fragmented, right? Just like architecture, it has become a fluid concept that is very contextual. You know, there are many different types of good design. So it's hard to say what the requirements of good design are. Of course, we can talk about function and form, that still works, and the economy of means and the strength of the goals, social value, personal meaning, and so on and so forth. We can go on forever. But I always feel that there's a last test that is very unscientific, but it works. Just close your eyes and think, if that thing, whether it's a building, an infrastructure, or an object, did not exist, would the world miss out? And it's funny because you'll have strange responses. You might think that some totally superfluous objects like the Tamagotchi are really a gift to the world. And if they didn't exist, it would be a pity, you know? So it's funny. That last test really works.
Yeah, I see there's a strong connection to I looked at a few of your curations more in depth, and I think what one thing you brought to MoMA was the idea of something as innocuous as a video game, right? Has large reaching connotations for the people who are really involved with that video game. Just bringing that to the surface, I think, was powerful for me to see, because that's the stuff that I grew up on, right? And I didn't know that that could ever go into a museum and people would
Of
look
course.
at it like they would a piece of art almost.
See, that my job is done. If you feel that way, no, seriously. That's what the beautiful thing about MoMA is. It's such a powerful platform that the
Mhm.
moment you present something at MoMA, all of a sudden people say, "Ah, is that legit? Is what I'm doing worthy of note that way?" You know, and all of a sudden you give a baseline to a whole population of designers that did not really understand how they would fit.
Mhm.
And you also give citizens agency, because the moment you know that your video games are important, you will also push back for them to be better. You know, you will just say, hey, this matters, so listen to me.
Yeah. Um, there's you said something there about citizens, right? And I think that that brings up a slightly different topic, and it's probably one of the most affecting moments in my architecture school career. And that was reading one of your interviews. I think it was with the zine, where you outlined that humans don't necessarily have the power to stop our extinction, um, which is a very affecting quote, right? It is sort of a relieving in a sense, but also very hard to think about. Um, but you also capstone that with that we have the power to create a legacy, that means something. Can you elaborate a little bit on maybe what you feel art or architecture or design in general means without humans around to use or appreciate it?
Oh, that's a big question. And it's almost like an asymptote, a holy grail, right?
Mm,
Because not only I, but several designers and artists have been trying to understand really what design or art would be without humans, but it's so impossible, right? So I'm trying to get there. It's almost like a transcendental kind of process together with other curators. I mean, you would be amazed how many of us exist. But going back to the extinction and the legacy, it's it's so funny because you're right. It's an ambiguous statement. It's at the same time, I don't know, energetic, and also sad, right? But it's pretty much what happens to individual human beings. At some point, you realize you're going to die and you start thinking of your legacy,
Mhm.
right? Same thing. We know that it's going to happen because that seems to be the course of nature. We have some control on how we vanish, right? And what we leave behind. So we need to make it count. We need to make our existence on the planet count. So that gives a lot of power. And people that learn design and architecture know what it means to have so much power within some constraints and with a brief, right? So I feel that that's where designers thrive. Crisis, a sense of foreboding, and a sort of fatalism, but that's where they do best.
Yeah. Yeah. I got really involved with that idea and trying to implement it in architecture, and I found it was
Wow, I would
a
love to know about that.
well, it was a very it was a wave of depression and acceptance and all of that stuff. And then I think I eventually saw success in that in the work of somebody like Tatiana Bilbao, where she had I don't know if you've seen the aquarium project proposal, where it would be taken over by nature, right? But so yeah, I mean, I guess just thank you, right, for showing
Oh my God, thank
for
you.
showing that to me.
So happy.
Um, but I guess maybe back to your curation, right? If that, do you see that profession, art curation, exhibition curation, as art itself? Like, is that, are you looking back or to other curators and seeing what they're doing and learning what they're doing, and then I'm thinking maybe more about like MoMA PS1, right? Because there are these things that pop up and they're larger in a sense, right? They're closer to architecture, maybe how I understand it, but I can also see that being applied to maybe smaller scale exhibitions. So yeah, the question boils down to: do you see curation as a work of art that can be preserved, much like, you know, cubism or something? I don't know.
I see it as a work of design. So less precious, doesn't need to be preserved, but should be remembered, hopefully, right? So mm, I always try to be a designer or an architect. I never try to be an artist. And there is this ambition in some cases to remake exhibitions. And certainly there have been curators in history that have been fantastic. But I always found it a little nauseous. It's like too much like navel gazing. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's important to learn lessons from exhibitions. Personally, of course, I look at the work of curators. Of course, I look at past exhibitions. I look at them with jealousy, like a good jealousy, right? For instance, I was very good friends with Okui and Weiser, who was this amazing curator that died last year. Unfortunately, actually, it's almost 2 years that he died. But I always I always was jealous of his exhibitions in a good way, and we would always bicker about it. So curators come in different shapes and in different sizes. There are the curators that go in depth in the work of one artist or one designer. I tend to be more like the hunter-gatherer. So I just like bring back my bloody, prey for my audiences. But I would feel really uncomfortable if people repeated my shows, because it would feel like more of an embalmed corpse
Hmm.
instead of a live mission. I would rather see what they leave behind.
Okay. Um, well, you've been at MoMA for 20 or so years now,
Oh,
right?
27.
27.
I
Well, that's a wonderful accomplishment, I think. But was there a pivotal moment where you found that your career was taking this path? Because if you did study architecture, right, like, was there a sort of early moment where you're like, this is the thing that I want to do?
No, never. Since I even fell into architecture because I did not want to do that. Was the only decision I made in my life, was to switch from economics to architecture. Everything else was surfing, right? So
Mm,
a lot of paddling, big muscles, a lot of fatigue, and but waiting for the right wave and taking it. So a mixture of hard work and daring and talent also. So but I never chose to become a curator. I never chose to come to New York. I never chose to work at MoMA. I just I responded to an ad in a magazine, and then all of a sudden I was called for the interview, and I'm like, oh my God, now what do I do? And you can't go back, right? So I've always put myself in these situations, like, on top of the wave, you got to go. It's already the speed of non-return. So,
Mhm.
and during my career at MoMA, there were many feelings of having a chance to really express. So the exhibitions really were gushing moments of self-expression, but a self-expression more in the vein of a movie director or a journalist rather than an artist.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time before the lecture, so you can have a few minutes to prepare, but I want to ask one
Sure.
final question that can be either totally about your work or not related to your work at all. But what is sort of keeping you afloat nowadays? What is making you happy in the world? Because I think there's a lot of frustration and anger. Um,
It's a tough moment. And I think I would be lying if I told you that I am happy. I am like everyone, I'm really having moments of depression, and it's hard to feel really buoyant, right? Luckily, I'm stubborn like a bull, and it's the year of the bull. I really am stubborn and disciplined. And when I have moments of depression, I find a way to push through them. What really gives me energy is Alice and Design Emergency, that really every week we have to produce, period. And that's
mhm,
amazing. And then, a lot of the relationships that I was able to rekindle online. It's very funny. I have more time now for friends than I had before. And of course, there's my family in Italy. I'm going tomorrow. So they
mhm,
always keep me on my toes. But it's a tough moment, less for me than for many others. But
mhm,
nobody can really be just at their best right now.
yeah. Well, thank you for being so candid about that because I think that, this is a very hard time for a lot of people and hopefully we can look back at this interview and say, we made it through successfully. And I think museum curation, art curation, architecture, I think, or design work, right? Like you said, if you can put your head down for a little bit and utilize that to get through.
And also,
Um,
you learn to live with anger, fear, and depression. They can be your friends. Just
mhm,
learn to live with them and you push through. So don't anybody ever feel that you have to be like, hey, everything is
right,
okay. Mm-mm.
right. It's not, but it will get better. So,
Absolutely.
well, thank you so much for joining me and answering a few of my questions. I'm looking forward to your talk
Yeah, thank
as
you.
part of the lecture series here. So
Ciao.
hopefully I'll be at the MoMA in person when we reopen.
Visit. Yes.
I'll try and visit. Well, thank you again, and I'll see you
Ciao,
later.
Martin. Bye.
Bye.